Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing something new, and I know that we've already covered the Florida Contractor's Manual for the exam. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the Builder's Guide to Accounting. According to what I've seen, about 20 to 30% of the questions on the exam are going to come from this book. Now I know that the Florida Contractor's Manual does have a section in it that covers business and accounting. And yes, there will be some information that overlaps from that book to this book. But I think that if you're gonna come across any kind of question on the exam that deals with specifically accounting, this is probably the book that I would go to first. Unless the test question says something like, according to the Florida Contractor's Manual or according to the Builder's Guide to Accounting. See, in that kind of question, they're already giving you a hint where to look for the answer. If you don't know where to look for the answer, and you know that the question is dealing specifically with business or accounting, my first bet would be to look in this book. And that's actually better for you because this book, as opposed to the Contractor's Manual, has a much better index. It's much easier to navigate this book than the other book. When you do come across a question that you're unsure where to look for the answer, I would start here in this index and I would try to pick out the keywords in the question and try to take those keywords to the index, and I would start there. So let's get into it. Builder's Guide to Accounting. We're gonna go chapter by chapter. These chapters are a lot smaller than the chapters in the other book, but you need to make sure that you cover the chapters and you're very familiar with everything that's in here. Like I've mentioned before probably in most of my videos, the test is not about knowing the right information. The test is really about being able to find the right information in the shortest amount of time possible. So, is it beneficial for you to know accounting? Sure. If you've been to college, a lot of this stuff is probably familiar to you, but you basically just need to know where to find the information for this exam. And if you don't want to retain any of the information afterwards, that's perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter. Really, just at this point, what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop some kind of familiarization with the book, so that we can navigate the book to find the correct answer as quickly as possible. Okay, chapter 1, why keep records, all right? This is just a basic overview. These chapters are very short and the information in here is pretty useful, I think, generally speaking. So if you want to read and cover everything, I would, but if you don't want to, it really is up to you. I'm just going to highlight what I think is important, okay? There's going to be a lot of terms that are going to keep coming up over and over and over. In this particular case, the first thing that I have highlighted is right here under the sales section. The sales journal is a detailed record of all of your income from operations. From my experience, from what I saw in the exam, many of the questions that you're going to see are going to be definitions, and they're gonna want to know whether you can quickly find the definitions to certain terms. So in this particular question, they're just basically defining what a sales journal is. Okay, super simple, super easy. Then you have things like receivables, checks, payroll, very common. And like I said, you might want to read this, but if you just kind of skim through it, that's why I just kind of be familiar with what the key terms are. Let's see, next, overhead expenses. I think this is actually quite important, and I wanted to mention it that on my exam, there were multiple questions where they discussed overhead expenses. And the kind of questions they would present would be, what is an example of an overhead expense, or what isn't an example of overhead expense? Now, in this chapter, since this is only the introductory chapter, they're not really getting into it too much, but I just kind of want to make it clear that that's the kind of questions you can expect. All right. So overhead expenses, I think, is an important category. Your record of past overhead expenses is the best indication of what you'd expect in the future. This is actually a question, essentially a direct question that I had on my exam, where they asked me what was the best indicator of what to expect in the future. And the correct answer was previous overhead expenses. Accruals. Cash received and paid out in a business does not reflect the whole financial picture. Bills you've sent are income even before the cash comes in, and the bills you owe are direct costs or operating expenses even before you mail the checks. These billed accounts are very real parts of your financial picture at any time. These are called accruals, all right? Another important term that's going to keep coming up over and over and over on the exam, possibly. So be familiar with what that is. The chart of accounts. The chart of accounts is a numbered list of the accounts on your general ledger and operating statement. Note what that is. There's also things like ratios, and we've seen that covered before, financial statements. So definitely, like I said, review this if you can, if you've got the time. Income taxes, forms, double entry bookkeeping. The most common modern bookkeeping method is called double entry bookkeeping. Assets, debits, and credits. These charts, they're going to get into it further in the next few chapters. The financial statements are going to be crucial. They're going to ask a bunch of questions about the financial statements. These are reports which express information summarized from the general ledger. The balance sheet is one of the three main financial statements. It is a listing of properties, assets, debts, liabilities, and ownership, value, net worth. The term balance sheets refer to the listing of accounts of balances or net totals when credit is subtracted from debits, and the proof of all debits listed on the balance sheet are equal to all credits. The basic formula which defines the balance sheet is assets equals liabilities plus net worth. You may see a variation of this. Before I kind of get into it, this is a very, very important formula, and I suggest you essentially memorize it and understand what it means. The test may try to trip you up. See, in this book, they're saying assets equals liabilities plus net worth, but on the exam, they could say something like assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. And even though you don't see it here, but that's essentially the same exact thing. So be familiar with that formula and its variation. The income statement, also called statement of profit and loss or the summary of operation, lists income, direct costs, operating expenses, and profits. Very, very important. This financial statement section, please do read, do understand, go over it a couple times if you need to. Then statements of cash flow, I would read this as well. Last year's income compared to this year's income will reveal the good and the bad trends in the business and the increase or decrease in volume, expenses, and profits. Yeah, that may seem self-explanatory, but still, make sure you understand what that means and read it. Chapter 1 is, that's pretty much it for chapter 1. It's an introductory chapter. It's a fairly easy chapter. I would read it. I would try to understand it. Go over it a few times if you have to. Like I said, just because I'm highlighting something here does not necessarily mean that that's all you're responsible for. You are responsible for everything in this book. They could throw out something random. They could throw out something very obscure, and you are still responsible for being able to answer it. Next, we're gonna I just want to briefly mention that towards the end of the chapter, they have test questions. And I think it would be a great idea for you to answer these test questions. After taking the test, I went back to this book and I took a look at some of these test questions, and I have to say that these kind of questions are something that you are pretty much exactly like the kind of questions that they will ask you on the test. So if you read this chapter and you review this chapter and you are familiar with the information in this chapter, you really shouldn't have any problems with these test questions. And if you don't have any problems with these test questions, you probably won't have any problems with these kind of questions on the exam. So yeah, also keep in mind the answers are in the back of the book. So they're not just leaving you hanging. And that's pretty much it for chapter 1. we're gonna go into chapter 2, but if you have any questions or comments, definitely leave me a comment, say something. If you want me to cover something, let me know. Other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.